Well, hey, it's Matt Steen, and this is another chemistry conversation. I'm excited today. I'm joined by Kenny Jahng. So, Kenny, he does a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but one of the things I'm most excited about with him is some of the coaching and just kind of and leadership development work he does with people in the Christian world. So, he has created churchmasterminds.com, which is just it's a phenomenal. I guess it's like a cohort based, come together, learn together, come out a better leader type of a deal, which is just utterly phenomenal. So, Kenny, thanks for taking some time to talk, man.
Glad to be here. Excited.
Yeah, good. Well, we'll try not to ruin that. So really, we typically just kind of sit around and have conversations, really about what we're seeing in the church world. Now, you're working with a lot of senior leaders. So, what are you learning about the church right now?
Oh, that's such a big question.
Yeah, let's start with the easy one, right?
Yeah. So do you want the list alphabetically, height order? It's like
yeah, exactly.
What are we learning right now? I think one of the things that's sticking out in my mind is church leaders are now starting to understand that measurement is important. So we had this offline world we used to call that's the church, and then I used to be a church online pastor, and back in the day, everyone would look at you.
Such a thing, even.
Yeah, well, they used to say, "Oh, you work with imaginary people, right? You have these virtual people that don't exist, and you just play with them in the interwebs." And
yeah,
and now it's revenge of the nerds, right? Like digital is here, and that's what's literally been happening. Once you can't do physical head counts in your sanctuary, or you can't take registration, or you can't do kids check-in with labels.
Yeah.
You have to figure out what's going on. Are we getting traction? And so measurement, I think, has really become important for pastors, even as we go back into a hybrid situation. And we all know what you measure moves, right? And Absolutely. So if you need to understand you're measuring the right things or not, you need to put a target out there for your team to say, hey, this is where we're going as a team. You got to cast that vision. And so I think that's the first thing. I think that trying to figure out what that means in this hybrid world in particular is what people are going after right now. And then I think that leads also then to having a plan. I don't think, I think church leaders have been fortunate, right? It's almost like we've been in a luxurious situation before that, you build it, they will come. There's all these things out there. But now it's kind of like, hey, we need to buckle down and have some strategic intent around the funnel, around assimilation, right? Follow up, all those things.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people that are going to hear that and are going to say, hey, that sounds like dirty marketing words.
Yes.
Which, so be it. That's another conversation for another time. But I mean, as you're kind of thinking through what we need to be measuring, especially as we go, from in person to totally online, now back to this weird hybrid thing that they never taught us about in seminary. What are the things that we need to be considered, measuring? What are those right things?
Well, I think some of the it's basic stuff that you would think about in the offline world.
Yep.
And then you just translate it online. It's a lot of people have these huge expectations, or they get all nervous and anxious, but it's really things like, instead of just measuring head counts, right, which is just IP addresses online, for example,
right?
I think thinking about how many people are taking the first intentional step that you're trying to put out there for them.
Okay.
Right. So what does that mean in terms of my, not just being an observer, but when I start to engage, what does that actually look like? And then measuring those interaction points. And that's where I think the strategy comes into place, because you need to start to reverse engineer from the actual engagement side, say, what is that first step where we're going to say, oh, that actually means that Matt didn't just drive by, but actually started to, walk up and do something with us. And so measuring that first step of that first interaction piece, I think is something that's going to become much more important to people.
Yeah. And so for every church, that first step is going to be slightly different, I'm guessing.
Yes.
What are some good first steps? Because there's a lot of people that are thinking, well, the first step is they come in and sit in a pew. And that's probably, not the first step. But what are some first steps that can help people kind of think through what that could be for their church?
Yeah. So again, I think there's the default stuff where leaders will say, oh, it's when they sign up for a small group or they sign up to volunteer. Yeah. And when they actually try to get into the baptism class or membership class, et cetera. But in reality, when you think of your own experience going to church, there's so many micro steps before that there, or leading indicators that they will get to a point of those big commitments. Yeah. And so, creating spaces where it might be meeting the pastor, right? Coffee with the pastor type thing, and asking Q&As. If it's outreach, volunteering, we just saw Barna just put out a study with Alpha talking about Gen Z and their mode, what their worldview of evangelism is. Ooh. And they are looking at what you do more than just what you say. And are you actually ministering to the community? Are you actually doing cause and outreach and things like that? And that, I think those types of things then afford you the opportunity to say, open that up to volunteer experiences for brand new people. Don't have volunteer experiences that are just for your insiders, your holy huddle. Yeah. How do you craft, and because not every volunteer experience is the same, how do you craft volunteer experiences strategically so that new people can get plugged in? Yeah. And that might be the beginning of a journey. That's a great example, I think, of that first step.
That goes back to that whole idea of, people are much less intimidated of being shoulder to shoulder with somebody than knee to knee with somebody. Right. Yes. And so if we can lure is probably a bad word. Oh, well. But if we can get them into working side by side with somebody, it's some cool conversations to result from that.
That's cool. Literally it. So one of the things I would say to measure is, can we measure conversations versus conversions instead of conversion points, right? Like, I'm going to sign up for this. I'm going to actually get committed to a 12-week Bible study or life group. Yeah. Can we talk about conversations, the engaging part? Can we actually pique their curiosity? Those are the types of things that I think we need to start measuring and pay attention to, so that there is a next step. There are options for them to graduate into different levels of relationship.
Yeah. That's really cool. And so I feel like there's been a conversation historically, maybe going back to maybe what Nelson Searcy stuff, where you have your dashboard and all these types of things. Yeah. But I think a lot of times what happens is churches will have a dashboard and it'll be great. We've got a dashboard. Look at all the pretty numbers and the charts and all that kind of stuff. But we forget that there needs to be, an actual plan in place when somebody is at a point on that dashboard, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you see it. So this is a place where instead of going from offline to online, going from online to offline might make sense. You have marketing systems on websites, right? So if you look at these big retailers and big B2B companies, they have systems where they'll say, hey, Matt, actually, we're tracking you, came to our homepage, then went to a product page, and then went to like an FAQ page. And that, right, like they're seeing like, oh, they went to very specific places. And then there's this thing called lead scoring. Like they're saying, hey, if this is a sales lead, at what point does Matt, instead of just becoming like a lurker, to someone who's actually considering our product? Yeah. Right. And there's these social signals like, hey, if I'm actually then reading the testimonials and the case study and the FAQs about a product, you probably are actually interested in that product, not just driving by. Yeah. What's the equivalence in all the things that you offer as a church, not just online, not just offline, both? What are those types of things that will increase the score to indicate that, oh, this person actually is like going down that pathway towards, coming to visit us, coming to a second time, third time, fourth time, that kind of thing.
Oh man, that's huge. And that's kind of getting into things again. We've never taught that in seminaries. We've never thought through,
that wasn't in your, after your pastoral care, right? After that class you went to, no?
Now, after that one was Pandemic 101. And that was the highlight of the seminary experience in and of itself. Yeah. So, I mean, this is, so we need to be thinking like a marketer in so many different ways as pastors. Tell me, so again, never taught in seminary, never taught in Bible college. I think you and I both have some business school experience, so we got a little bit of that. Where's a good place if a pastor say, wants to lean into some of this stuff? What's a good primer for them? I mean, yes, they need to go to churchmasterminds.com and sign up for the one that's coming up in September. But I mean, what would you put on a reading list for a pastor?
The issue is that there isn't any resource here. I think that's why seminaries and institutions are not teaching this stuff, because those institutions are geared or set up to teach things that have been codified.
Right.
What we're seeing right now is this is all innovation front. And if you look at what innovation is about, it's about communities of innovators. So like in the startup world, there's communities of startup,
right,
entrepreneurs itself. Same thing here. It is literally about talking to other forward-thinking leaders and seeing what they're doing, giving your teams the ability to actually experiment, and being part of the conversation. It actually means that you have to be a little bit more proactive than usual and reach out and connect with other people. Yeah. 2 are better than 1, 3 are better than 2. In this place, it's just 1. Like as a church online pastor in the past, we used to always say, if you've met a church online pastor that tells you this is the blueprint for how to do church online, and if you're not going to do this way, you're not going to succeed. You got to run.
Yeah. Right.
That person's a fool, right? Like that. Literally, we are all learning together.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things. And again, that's why we built these mastermind groups, because it's kind of like the old seminar, workshop, conference thing is a little bit like in this, for this type of topic, is a little bit moot, because those types of venues are teaching things that are, mainstay stuff from years ago.
Right.
Peer-to-peer learning is the place. So that's the answer in my mind. And that's why we're investing in it. Is like, how do you connect with other leaders to do that? And honestly, you don't need formal structures. It's honestly, it's looking up peers that you're seeing and hearing about, calling them up. And this is the secret of this whole industry, Matt, is that most church leaders are open to a call. Most church leaders are open to sharing what they've learned and what they've failed at, what they've succeeded at, what they're dreaming about.
Yeah.
It is surprising how many leaders we challenge to actually go back and call one new contact a day for 30 days, and how hard that is, because it's not built into our culture. Our culture is always about, I'm building my little micro empire here with my own church. That's my IP, my intellectual property. I'm not going to, it's my secret sauce. And I think this is the one place where secular marketplace has a good influence on the ministry space, where in the marketplace, that type of innovation, community sharing is the norm.
Yeah.
Bringing it into the ministry place is definitely one of the calls that I have right now. I mean, just stuff like this, right? Talking shop together.
Oh yeah.
And then sharing with other people so that other people can glean from it. And hopefully we'll be able to learn, because you and I don't know everything.
No.
I'd love to see the comments and the people who actually reach out to me, which that happens often. And then we learn from each other. This is literally this is how we learn today.
Absolutely. That's awesome. And I think you nailed it with this idea that how many pastors, everybody will take your call. If you call another pastor, so much of this is we're so isolated, we're so alone in so many ways, and we're all yearning for it, but we all can't get over ourselves and just make that phone call and say, hey, help me think through this. Right? It's that's so sad, but it's so true. I love the idea that you guys are giving people an excuse to come together, kind of break out of that shell and really learn together for the sake of the kingdom.
I'm telling you, it's energizing. Like you hear about Zoom fatigue and all that stuff. I just looked up in my Zoom account. Last month, I think I did 157 hours of Zoom last.
Oh Lord, I don't even want to know where to look for that.
Right. So that 157 hours, and it's usually only over 5 days a week. So 20 days. Yeah. That's a lot of Zoom. But I'm energized by it, because I'm not seeing this, like what we're doing right now is not depleting. It's energizing, because it's about relationship, and it's not task oriented. Yep. And there's some sort of growth that's going to come out of this conversation for me, and hopefully for you too.
Yeah.
And as long as you attend to those things, relationship and growth, I do believe that this type of virtually mediated conversation is life-giving and life-serving. And that's the antidote to Zoom, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kenny, that's awesome, man. Thanks for taking some time to sit down and talk. If I'm taking anything away from this, it's let's get over ourselves and let's actually get together with one another and hash through this stuff and learn together. You are, like I said, you're doing churchmasterminds.com, which people can go and check out and just buy everything on there. But I mean, part of what you're getting ready to do is I think you're doing an XP group in beautiful scenic Orlando, Florida, the end of September, which sounds like it's going to be a pretty cool gathering. It's a handful of guys coming together to talk through what they're experiencing in church and kind of learn from one another, and no talking heads, nobody is being platformed or anything like that. But
absolutely. Yeah. The one thing you see a lot of these coaching groups or cohort learning, etc. And that's usually still a sage from the stage type of thing, one to many. What we've seen is, honestly, especially for executive pastors, right? So Brian Buford, who's an XP at Grace Church in Boston, is the one who's partnering with me to build this network of masterminds. What we've seen is, especially for executive pastors, it's a lonely vocation. You're sitting there and you're basically doing anything that the senior pastor doesn't want to do or doesn't know how to do or hasn't thought of to do. And so it's a challenging position, but the perspective is very unique. Not many other people in that ministry team understands and feels what you're challenged with. Getting into the room with other people who know that unique pressure, responsibility, and challenge is completely transformative if you're able to plug into a community like that. And so it's been wonderful. It's a little bit over a dozen people at a time. The last time we were in Austin, we're doing one in Gatlinburg, we're doing it in Florida. It's just one of those things, I think, is if you've never been part of masterminding, which is a very specific form of collaboration, it's amazing. It truly is an amazing experience.
That's awesome. Well, Kenny, thank you so much. We'll drop the details on churchmasterminds.com down below if anybody wants to dig into that some more. But Kenny, thank you so much for the time, man. Appreciate what you're doing for the kingdom.
Thanks for being here, and I love what you guys are doing for all the church leaders out there.